Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricardo Chabel. I'm an associate professor at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. It's a pleasure to be here and to be moderating this webinar. This is the third webinar of the DCRC, a series of 3 webinars that were put together. Today we're going to be talking about the effects of resynchronization on fertility and economics. Just a little introduction for those of you that are not very familiar with the Dairy Cattle Reproductive Council. This is a proactive organization with long-term interest in raising awareness of issues critical to reproductive performance. Through the information and communication of the DCRC, we're striving to deliver the latest technology and resources about reproductive management of dairy cattle. This council actually was created in 2006, and it involves an array of dairy industry professionals like academia folks and consultants, practitioners, and producers. And we have been very engaged in a collaborative effort to improve cattle reproduction and take it to the next level. So it's a very important council that has been really moving reproductive performance of cattle forward. I just want to remind everyone that in November 7th and November 8th, we will have the annual DCRC meeting in Indianapolis. Very good speakers, very different topics that are going to be very useful for producers and veterinarians. Today we have Dr. Todd Bilby, who is the Dairy Technical Services Manager for Merck Animal Health, speaking again about effects of resynchronization on fertility and economics. The sponsor of this seminar or the webinar is Merck Animal Health. We thank Merck for their support. We will ask questions to the speaker at the end of the talk, and all you have to do if you have questions is move your mouse up to the top of the screen and then hit the Q&A window. You can then type in your questions as we go along. And then I'll ask the questions at the end so that Dr. Bilby can answer them. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the dcrcouncil.org website, so you will have access to it after it. Well, Dr. Bilby, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Ricardo. And thanks for everybody being on the call today. This is a talk that I've been able to give at several conferences now, and I really want to start off by thanking my co-authors. The moderator, Dr. Ricardo Chabel, and I've worked together collaboratively on several of these projects when I was employed with the university. And I'm going to show some data that he's done from his lab as well today. And also Dr. Julio Giordano, who's at Cornell University now, who's helped me out with the economics. So I appreciate the co-authors' support in these talks and in the studies that we've done. So without further ado, I'm going to get into synchronization and resync. I'm going to start off a little bit slow and get a basis for us, but then get into how estrus detection plays in with the synchronization program. And specifically, I'm going to focus on resynchronization for most of my talk. And so as we know, as we've bred animals to produce more milk, with that they have to eat more food to support that milk production, and we see that they have an increase in metabolism in order to do this. And so with this increase in metabolism, you also get a reduction because of the metabolism of important steroid hormones such as estrogen and progesterone. And so anything that you do to elevate milk yield, whether it be better housing, better nutrition, etc., anything to elevate that milk yield, you're most likely going to have challenges in being able to improve estrus detection, one for the simple fact of the reduction in those important steroids. So estrogen level, for instance, has to be elevated high enough in the blood in order to trigger behavioral centers within the brain for that cow to know that she's in heat and to show signs of heat. So this is a graph taken from a paper published in 2004 by Lopez, just showing higher producing animals versus low producing. This is in kilograms per day for the milk production. But more importantly, if you look at the estradiol levels, it's lower in higher producing animals than low producing animals. If you look at the duration of estrus, how many total number of standing events, and even total time standing for those events, all of those were reduced in higher producing animals versus lower producing animals. So this again just shows the challenges that we have as we continue to improve milk yield in animals. We're going to have to continue to be better managers and be able to identify cows accurately in heat. So along with these challenges of estrus detection, there's some management challenges as well. So some people have shortages of labor, for instance. Maybe there's not headlocks. Maybe the way the facility designs, or they're older facilities, and it's harder to be able to accurately manage heat detection and train people to accurately identify a cow in heat. So more and more of our labor source is not as familiar with agriculture, and so we have to spend a fair amount of time training. With that, we've had estrus detection technologies that have come about and continue to become more popular, such as activity monitors, pedometers, as such, to help us to try to identify animals in heat. And anything we can do with tail paint, secondary signs, whatever is going to help this. But we have all different kinds of methods of estrus detection, which in turn can also present some challenges in and of itself. So one thing that really affects our heat detection on a dairy, as we know, not only have we over time bred animals produce more milk, but also over time we've went from pasture-based type systems or animals that are on dirt or pasture longer into confinement housing where they're on concrete 24/7. And so we know that mounting activity in this particular study was 15-fold greater when they're housed on dirt instead of concrete. So that can definitely have an effect on our estrus detection. And something that I find quite interesting when I have the opportunity to travel around the country and look at different records and reproduction is definitely when you get in the upper Midwest and the Northeast, I see a difference as far as whether they're doing full time day eye, no heat detection, versus in the West Southwest where I see much more heat detection in with the synchronization program, which is the basis of my talk today. And I show this slide just because there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to synchronization programs, and that goes the same on whether you're using heat detection or not using heat detection. I don't blanket recommend one or the other. I think it really depends on the farm's limitations and what they're able to achieve. And so this is taken from NOM's data in 2007, and if you look at the graph on your left or the table on your left, you'll see that this is by region, and this is housing type. And in the West, we have a lot more freestall barns. About the same as they are in the East, but we have a lot more open dry lots, so a lot more animals on dirt, versus in the East where you have a lot more in tie stall barns and even a few stanchion barns and freestall barns. So definitely more animals appear to be on concrete, which I think can also present its challenges and why we see some differences in the Northeast and upper Midwest on them choosing to use more full-time day eye protocols versus in the West Southwest where you get more heat detection. On the table on the right, this is the percent of operations that use time day eye programs to manage their reproduction. And this just drives home my point that in the West, you'll see there's less that use full-time day eye programs versus in the East for their heifers and cows. So I think there's some regional differences there with good reason. If you have bad conception rates or low heat detection, it could be better for you to just stick to a full-time day eye program. And some regions have a tougher time doing this than others. I can't give a talk anymore these days without stressing enough how important the transition period is. If we can get a cow through the transition period without any health events, without any health issues, we can get good fertility, pretty high fertility. And this table here is a summary of several different papers, but just showing normal fertility. And these are animals that went through the transition period without any issues. They had a pregnancy per AI of about 50%, whereas if they had some type of health event or health issue, this average pregnancy per AI was down to 38%. So it's not all all about synchronization, and in fact, more times than not, when I'm on a dairy and there's reproduction issues, it's not necessarily the shot program, and it seems like more and more we really need to be critical of our transition period, and if we get good cows through the transition period, fine, we usually have good fertility. So my first take-home message, I broke this up. There's going to be 4 take-home messages. The first one is how important it is to pre-synchronize before an off-sync to improve fertility. And, you know, the first paper really published looking at pre-synchronization before off-sync was in 2001, and it was kind of based off of this data from Dr. Vasconcelos in Brazil, who published this, showed in 1999. This is a graph showing the diameter of the follicle across days of the estrus cycle. So in a 21-day period, for instance, you can see we have 2 follicular waves in the cow, and these follicles grow up and regress, and then we have a second follicular wave that will grow up. The ones that are highlighted in the black are those that are about 10 millimeters in size. So we know to respond to a GnRH injection, they need to be about 10 millimeters in size to respond to that GnRH and hopefully cause ovulation. So if you were to start an off-sync program, which the off-sync begins with a GnRH injection and then 1 week later prostaglandin and then 2 to 3 days later GnRH and breed. If you were to start that first GnRH injection, we know that if we can give that GnRH injection of off-sync and cause an ovulation, we're going to get better fertility. So if we start that off-sync program early in that cow's estrus cycle, say in the first 4 days, she does not have follicles big enough to respond to that first GnRH to cause an ovulation. So you have low ovulation rate. If we were just to wait a little bit longer so that cow's between days 5 to 9 of her estrus cycle, we can get very high ovulation rate. Keep on going here. Now when you get the second follicular wave and you have the follicles from the first wave turning over and they become atretic and non-responsive, but you have the second wave growing up, so you'll catch a few, but still not as good as being between that day 5 to 9 of their estrus cycle. And then lastly, when they're out there about to ovulate anyway, as you can guess, the ovulation rate goes up. So this is the premise of why we do pre-synchronization before an off-sync. The goal is to get the animals into the correct stage of their estrus cycle so that when we give that first GnRH of off-sync, we will get a high ovulation rate. And so we want these cows to be between days 5 to 9 of the estrus cycle. So here's a standard protocol, a popular protocol that you'll see out there termed pre-sync off-sync. This is 2 shots of prostaglandins 14 days apart. And then, for example, in this illustration, let's say 50 days or 51 days is their voluntary waiting period. That's usually when that second prostaglandin occurs. And then they wait anywhere 11 to 12 days. Some farms will even do 14 days before they start the off-sync program. But we know that 11 to 12-day interval is going to be optimal for getting cows into that correct stage of the estrus cycle. Now, one challenge with these protocols is the fact that now that we have those particular intervals that we need to stick to fit the biology of the cow, unfortunately that becomes a few management challenges due to the fact that we're now giving injections on multiple days of the week. But several producers choose to what they call cherry pick or heat detect after that second prostaglandin pre-sync and catch some of these cows in heat and remove them from the program in AI, and the rest of them fall into off-sync. But for this example, let's say we were doing a full-time AI, or let's say we missed the cow in heat, and even though she did show a heat, we missed her. If these cows show a heat, 83% of them show heats within 2 to 6 days after that second prostaglandin. If we did not check these cows in heat and we let them fall into the off-sync, a cow that showed a heat 2 days after prostaglandin will be day 9 of her estrus cycle when she begins off-sync. And if she's at 3 days showed a heat, 4 days showed a heat, and so on, out to 7 days, now they're at 4 days of the estrus cycle. This is getting these animals into the correct stage of their estrus cycle between that days 5 to 9 or days 4 to 9 here so that we get the best ovulation rate with this GnRH injection to start off-sync. So that's the whole reason we use pre-sync before an off-sync program, is to get them at the right stage of the cycle so we get the ovulation rate to GnRH. Another popular program out there is double off-sync. As you can see here in this illustration, it's just like it sounds. It's 2 off-sync programs 7 days apart. Now, obviously, with this, again, comes the same challenges as far as having to give more injections on multiple days of the week. But the goal of this is to get the animals approximately about day 7 of their estrus cycle when they begin off-sync. So that will put them between that days 5 to 9 to where we know we can get good ovulation. And so this program works really well if you're using a full time-day-eye program, no heat detection. I'm going to talk about how I caution the use of this if I had a goal on the farm is to catch cows in heat. Because of the multiple GnRH injections used within this program, you really can reduce your heat detection. And so if you can catch a cow in heat on your farm and you can get good conception rates to those heats, you want to make sure and not use a synchronization program that's going to hurt your heat detection. Another popular program out there is called G6G. This begins with the prostaglandin injection, 3 days later GnRH, and then wait 6 days and start the OBSYNC program. Again, this will get the animals at estrus cycle of about day 6, which is within that time period that we need them that we get the best ovulation rate. Again, this is a good program for full-time day eye, but due to the fact of an initial GnRH injection, that can become some challenges when it goes to heat detection, and again, I want to talk about more of that later. So 3 protocols that do really well for first-time day eye and improving fertility, and we know that our first AI and that first insemination that we can get pretty good fertility out there. Conception rates at that first AI is usually pretty good, but then it tends to fall off over time. So on the second insemination and third insemination, and a lot of the last 8 years, 6, 7, 8 years spent looking at ways to improve fertility for those second inseminations and greater, and using resynchronization programs in order to not only shorten the interval between breedings, but hopefully to improve fertility. And a lot of the thinking behind these resync programs was utilizing the day of the estrus cycle and when the optimal time to start these programs, but more and more have been looking at, can we utilize pre-synchronization methods to improve fertility on resync? Just like we do on first AI, is it worth doing on second AIs and greater to improve fertility? So we know that pre-sync programs increase fertility. Studies show anywhere from 7 to 9 percentage units, and so we can get better fertility by using a pre-sync program. So a question I get asked quite often is, should we estrus detect and time-day eye, or should we just do 100% time-day eye? And I think the answer to this question is it all depends. And I brought that up at the first of the call or the webinar today, is just how the different challenges across different farms. And so it really depends on the limitations of that farm. But I got some pushback that the only way we're going to get good fertility is if we do full-time day eye. And that simply isn't true. And this is a study done by the moderator on the call, Dr. Chabel, and Dr. Jose Santos, who's now at the University of Florida. And they've done this study and published it in 2010. It was done in California. They utilized a pre-sync, off-sync program. They started at 35 days in milk with the first prostaglandin injection. They waited 14 days and gave the second prostaglandin injection. And this is the time of enrollment. They took half the cows that went through 100% of the time-day eye program, and they did 0 heat detection. Or they had half the group that went through and got estrus detected and AI'd, or also known as cherry picking, and then went through the off-sync program and received time-day eye. So should we do 100% time-day eye, or should we look at cherry picking? The results of this study, again, the cherry picking group here on the left, 100% time-day eye on the right, they had about 320 animals per group. This particular farm had a 59% estrus detection rate versus 0 for the 100% time-day eye group, as you would expect. Because you're cherry picking earlier, as you would expect, days in milk at first AI was about 10 days shorter, so 64 days in milk for first AI average versus 74 for the 100% timed AI. When you look at pregnancy per AI on the first, or in this case, we'll just jump to the second preg check, there was no difference in fertility at second preg check between the two groups. Statistically, there was no difference between the two. However, the cherry-picking group was 10 days shorter for their first AI. There was no difference in pregnancy loss, and as you would expect, the cost of synchronization was higher for the 100% timed AI group versus the cherry-picked group. So this just shows that in this particular method with cherry-picking and a pre-sync off-sync with good heat detection, they reduced the interval to first breeding, no difference in pregnancy per AI, and the cost of synchronization was cheaper if they used cherry-picking. So I wanted to go back and look at the reproduction award winners. So the DCRC has reproduction awards to where people all over the U.S. can submit data from their farms, and it gets judged by a panel of judges to rank them as platinum, gold, silver, or honorable mention. And so what I wanted to do was look at the past DCRC winners and see what these guys are doing. The guys winning the awards, the guys with the best fertility out there, what programs are they doing? Are they doing heat detection? Are they doing 100% timed AI? Or are they doing a mixture of the two? And when I looked at that, as you can see, 21 of the 24 winners from the data that I looked at up through 2011, 21 of the 24 were using heat detection in with a timed AI program. We had one herd that did 100% timed AI, and we had two herds that did 100% heat detection. So they did not have a timed AI program. So the majority of the herds winning the awards were doing a heat detection in with timed AI program. Of these, the pregnancy rates for these platinum award winners, so the best winners out there in this time range, ranged from 29 to 40% for their pregnancy rate. So we can achieve high fertility in with heat detecting, but synchronization program is a must because you're not going to catch all the cows in heat, whether you're using activity systems, tail chalk, visual observation. There's simply going to be some cows that aren't going to show a heat. There's some cows that aren't cycling. Numerous reasons that having that timed AI program in place is going to catch those animals. And so it's important to have both. And with that, you can still get high fertility. But what about the resynchronization of dairy cows and estrus detection? So I talked about how our first AI, we can get pretty good conception rates normally, and then it starts to trickle off thereafter. So we wanted to look at using resynchronization and pre-sync programs in order to try to improve fertility. And a lot of your resynchronization programs out there that are published today that we used to cite 3 or 4 years ago and beyond was done in no heat detection. So a lot of the sync programs published out there were utilizing zero heat detection. They just did full-timed AI. And so I think there's a huge difference when we start incorporating heat detection in there because you're removing cows that show a heat. The ones left over are normally a concentrated population of animals that are, for some reason, have issues or did not respond to initial injections. But if you look at the resync programs published out there, and assuming these cows are reading the same textbooks that we are, they should be showing heats between days 20 to 24. So in this illustration, you can see first AI, whether it be a timed AI or off a heat. If you look at 20 to 24 days later, if this animal was to show a heat, then that means in order to get these animals to respond to that GnRH at the appropriate time, we need to start our first GnRH injection of off-sync at day 29 after AI. That is, if these animals are all showing heats between days 20 to 24 and we don't detect those heats, then we need to be given a GnRH injection on day 29, and that will put them between days 5 to 9 in the cycle to where we like to have them to get the best response. Now, the question is, are the cows reading the same textbooks we are? do they all show a heat 20 to 24 days after the first AI or after an AI at all? So here's a Dairy Comp 305 graph. This is the pattern of return to estrus of lactating dairy cows. And as you can see, sure, there's a good group of animals that show a heat between that days 20 to 24, but look at all of these outliers to the left and to the right of this. And when you tally these up, it's about 50% of the animals are not between days 20 to 24. Here's 6 different herds. 6 different herds ranging from 70 pounds up to 90 pounds of milk. And this is the pattern of return to estrus within that days 20 to 24. So it ranged from 40% up to 58%, but the average was 52%. So when we make these resynchronization calculations, or what we used to base it off of, was that all the animals were showing heat between days 20 to 24, and that's simply not true. Only about half your animals showing a heat on the time when we think they're supposed to. The other half are at some other stage, and this could be due to early embryo loss, extending that cycle a little bit. We've got short cycling animals. So there's numerous reasons why all these animals aren't showing heat at the exact time that we think they should. So with that, since we know only 50% of our animals are showing a heat at the time period we can, then that really throws out the suggestion to start our off-sync programs at day 29, because if you do that, you're only targeting half your herd. So how do we get the majority of our animals into the right stage of the cycle so that we can get the best fertility on a resync program? And so of lately, there's been a big push to look at using pre-synchronization programs for the resync program to improve fertility. So I'm going to just jump to the chase here, and this is looking at different pre-sync protocols before resync. So there's several studies out there. A lot of them compared it to just the traditional off-sync. So after a timed AI or initial AI off a heat, at their preg check, if they were open, they got the first GnRH of off-sync and finished the off-sync timed AI program. However, the first study looking at utilizing the GGPG program, which is a GnRH injection 1 week prior to off-sync. This was published by our group in 2010. It was a multi-site project between California and Arizona. And we gave a GnRH injection 1 week prior to off-sync in order to force these animals hopefully to be in the right stage of the cycle. So if they're open at preg check, they responded at first GnRH. And when we did this, we saw an improvement in fertility versus doing nothing at all, versus the traditional off-sync program. So giving a GnRH injection 1 week prior to off-sync, we improved fertility versus no pre-synchronization program at all. Another program out of Wisconsin, the double off-sync that I talked about, how they used it on first-time AI, they've also looked at it in a resynchronization program. And again, doing a double off-sync on a resync program, they also got an improvement in fertility. The issue here is that now you're extending the days out by about a week from your interval between AI. And we know each day increases a cost of a day open can be expensive. So granted, you get an improvement in fertility, but at the same time, you get an increase in days open or intervals between breeding. Another program out of Wisconsin was giving at preg check, if they were open, they received a prostaglandin injection, and these animals were not detected in heat, and 12 days later, they all fall into the off-sync program. So all three of these bottom protocols were looking at different techniques on a resynchronization program to improve fertility, and all of them improved fertility versus doing nothing at all. However, a couple of these programs here, the double off-sync and this modified pre-sync off-sync with the prostaglandin 12 days before the off-sync, all extended the interval between AI and breeding. So the pre-sync programs increased fertility, but some programs increase that interval between AI breeding, which we don't like. We don't want to improve or increase the interval between breedings because we know that costs us money. So previous resync studies only evaluated timed AI fertility and really did not include estrus detection. So I already spoke that a lot of the sync programs out there were evaluated with full-timed AI, no heat detection. And it wasn't until recently, the last 4 years or so, has people really started evaluating how heat detection plays in with these synchronization programs. And so the first study I'm going to go through, Dr. Chabel published this here just of recently, looking at 2 different pre-sync methods before resynchronization. The study was conducted on 2 dairies, one in Minnesota and one in Wisconsin. Had a total of about 920 cows, and they were enrolled at preg check, which was done at 32 days, plus or minus 4 days after AI. And they were tested 2 pre-sync programs. Now, one of the herds used tail paint for their estrus detection method, and another herd, one in Wisconsin, used Affimilk activity system for their heat detection method. So the 2 protocols utilized here was after a initial AI at non-pregnancy diagnosis, which was done on day 32. If the animals were open, they received a prostaglandin injection, and they were checked in heat. If they were in heat, they were removed from the protocol and AI'd. The ones that weren't found in heat fell into the OBSYNC program 11 days later, versus a program utilizing GnRH at preg check and then 1 week later starting OBSYNC. So the goal here was 2 things. One, look to see how estrus detection plays in with 2 programs that utilizing 2 different drugs. So one's utilizing prostaglandins as the pre-sync method, one utilizing GnRH as the pre-sync method. And we know that these 2 drugs do 2 different things. Prostaglandins are going to promote heat detection. It causes CL regression and causes the cow to show a heat, whereas given a GnRH, causes the follicle to ovulate. So it can actually reduce your heat detection. However, it will be the shortest protocol on paper anyway. You can see that only 7 days later you can start OBSYNC. And you can even start this earlier with the GnRH occurring 1 week before preg check, starting OBSYNC after preg check. But they wanted to compare these 2 programs in with heat detection, like we do on a lot of the dairies out there. When they did that, this is the pattern of re-insemination of non-pregnant cows pre-synchronized with GnRH or prostaglandin. And this is cows not inseminated. So the quicker this line goes down is the faster cows are getting inseminated. The prostaglandin group is in the red. The GnRH group is in the blue. So if they gave a prostaglandin injection to an open cow at non-pregnancy diagnosis, you can see they start breeding a lot of these animals 2 to 5 days later. And a lot of these animals get bred and removed from the protocol. The ones that didn't show a heat left over start the OBSYNC program and eventually out here get timed AI. Whereas the GnRH group, because you gave GnRH and you caused that follicle to ovulate, you really knocked down your heat detection. And it's very apparent here on this graph. You can see when they gave GnRH, very few cows, if any, really showed any heat detection, and which forced them all into the shot program a week later. So they started OBSYNC and then received timed AI. So this, to me, is just a great graph showing the differences in the 2 products and how they affect heat detection on your dairy. So giving prostaglandins, we can catch cows in heat. The ones that don't show a heat fall into OBSYNC. If you give GnRH, don't expect to give many cows in heat. If you look at the differences in fertility from them using those 2 programs, so this is the GnRH group there on the left, prostaglandin group on the right. Cows submitted to the timed AI program, well, again, because they gave GnRH and knocked down the heat detection, you had about 90% of the animals submitted to the timed AI program and 84% of those getting fixed time. Whereas in the prostaglandin group, about 40% of those got fixed time. So a lot less of them got a timed AI because they were removed off of heat detection. And even though the GnRH group was the shorter protocol on paper, it actually was longer interval between AIs due to the fact that you give GnRH, you knock down heat detection, and you force cows on a week later to go on through the OBSYNC program. So it actually extended the interval between AIs. Even though it looked shorter on paper, it actually extended it because you couldn't knock down those heats. If you look at the pregnancy per AI, there was no difference in fertility between the two groups. So as long as you do some type of heat detection, some type of precinct program, you're going to improve fertility. So there's no difference in fertility between the two groups. However, the prostaglandin group, you bred more cows in heat and was the shortest protocol. There also was no difference in pregnancy loss in this study. So this just goes to my next point, which take-home message number 2, whether you're using GnRH or HCG, this is going to reduce estrus detection, and prostaglandin is going to promote estrus detection. So if you're using protocols with multiple GnRH injections in them, keep in mind your heat detection is going to be reduced compared to a protocol with prostaglandin injections. So another question that we wanted to ask when I was at the university, we always said we needed to keep at least an 11-day interval between our prostaglandin and our off-sync programs in order to get these animals in the right stage of the estrus cycle, and I've already talked about that. But that is assuming that you're not breeding cows off of heat. That's assuming 11 days later all the cows you had gave the prostaglandin to 11 days before are going to be at that stage of the cycle. But what happens if you put heat detection in there? Because if you have heat detection, you're going to remove the cows that show a heat. The ones left over, there's probably a reason they're left over. Yes, some of them you missed in heat, but some of those didn't respond to prostaglandin, probably because they're at a different stage of the estrus cycle. So really, calculating those days becomes much different when you're looking at it in a heat detection system, because the cows left over, they're left over for a reason, and they're probably at odd stages of their estrus cycle anyway. So do we have to wait that 11-day interval when we utilize prostaglandin in an estrus detection system? So I'm just going to jump to the take-home message of this study. This was just published a few months ago by my graduate student at the time, Ralph Bruno. There was no difference on fertility whether they used GnRH or prostaglandin as a precinct tool. So we had 3 treatments that was set up in this study. Animals that after they received the first AI at non-pregnancy diagnosis on day 32, if those animals were open, they either received a prostaglandin injection and 11 days later started off-sync. The entire time we were heat detecting through these programs versus giving prostaglandin and waiting 1 week. So a week later, start off-sync. Again, heat detecting these animals, as I showed you earlier, cows that show a heat, 83% of them are going to show a heat between 2 and 6 days. And then the one left over would hopefully roll into the off-sync. Plus, this would keep it on the same day of the week, so it would be an easier schedule, hopefully, for producers. Versus the GGPG program, which is given a GnRH 1 week prior to non-pregnancy diagnosis if they were open and they received the off-sync program. So these were the 3 treatment protocols, either using prostaglandins or GnRH as our precinct tool, heat detecting during these programs, and then looking at both fertility and interval between AIs. So the overall pregnancy per AI, overall meaning we took both the cows detected in heat and the timed AI animals and put those together. So that's the overall fertility of these programs. There was no difference between the 3 programs on fertility. 30% versus 27% versus 26% pregnancy per AI at that second preg check. So statistically, there was no difference in fertility across the 3 programs. However, we know that the prostaglandins and GnRH do 2 different things. So this just shows that GnRH reduced the number of cows detected in estrus and increased the number of timed AI. So here in the blue is the GnRH group. The red is the prostaglandin 7 days later started off-sync, or in the green is prostaglandin 11 days later started off-sync. So this is the number of cows that were estrus detected in AI. As you can see, if they received the GnRH, they had a 71% reduction in the number of animals that were detected in heat versus the animals that received prostaglandin. So a huge reduction here. And again, I just go back to, if a goal of your farm is to catch cows in heat, and you can accurately do this and get good fertility, you don't want to use a program that's going to hurt your heat detection. If you look at the number of cows get time day-eyed, as you'd expect, once you give GnRH, you knock down heats, you force more cows into the time day-eye program, so 78% of them went into the time day-eye program, whereas only 24% in the prostaglandin 7-day group and 22% in the prostaglandin 11-day group got time day-eyed. So a lot less went through the full protocol when using prostaglandins, and there was no difference in fertility. So why not use a prostaglandin group if you're detecting heats? This just looks at the interval between breedings. So this is a survival analysis. Again, the faster this line goes down is the quicker cows are becoming inseminated. And this is the interval between the study enrollment and AI days. As you can see, if you gave a GnRH injection, that's this top group, less cows showed a heat, more of them full into the time day-eye program and eventually got time day-eyed. Whereas your prostaglandin group, both your 11-day and your 7-day, you're breeding a lot more animals in heat, and then eventually they're out here and they get time day-eyed. So when we looked at the interval between AIs, even though the GnRH group on paper was the shortest protocol, it actually, because it hurts heat detection and forces all your animals in, or a good portion of your animals into the OffSync program, it actually had a longer interval between AIs of 42 days versus 39 days for the prostaglandin 11-day group and 36 days for the prostaglandin 7-day group. So I've had pushback on farms when I would first go out there to tell them, okay, we should pre-synchronize a resync program, and let's give a prostaglandin injection and open preg check, and then wait 11 days and go into OffSync for those that don't show a heat. And immediately, producers will say, well, I don't want to wait. That's a long time interval period. I want to get these cows pregnant faster. But if you're heat detecting, you actually will get a lot of those pregnant quicker than you will utilizing a GnRH protocol such as this, that we went in very aggressively to get these animals AI'd as quick as possible. So take-home message number 3, initiating the resynchronization too early after previous AI could reduce fertility. So we summarized several studies here to look at the timing of initiation of resync protocol and fertility. So it's another question I've gotten quite often: when should I start my OffSync? On a resync program, when should I start my resynchronization program? And here are 4 studies that utilized intervals from previous AI to start of resync, either 19 to 21 days after AI, or they started the OffSync 25 to 28 days. They're in the red, or in the green, you'll see it was day 32 to day 33. So different intervals after AI, and if you total all of these up and look at the pregnancy per AI for these programs, you can see those that started early, between that days 19 to 21, had worse fertility than if you waited out here to say, and for this case, day 32 to day 33. With really not much difference here between 25 and 28 and 32 and 33, but you can see that going too early, that day 19 to day 21, you have worse fertility. So trying to go too early with some of these resync programs could hurt your fertility in some instances. So another question in a paper that just got published this past month is the difference in fertility if I start resync on day 32 or day 39. So some practitioners prefer to rectal palpate, and it's commonly done around that day 39 area. Some people choose to use whether it be a blood test or ultrasound and say go in at day 32. So a question we would get is, if I'm rectal palpating and starting my sync program at day 39, am I going to have different fertility, worse or better, than the person ultrasounding or blood testing at day 32 and starting OffSync? And if you look at the preg checks from this study, there was absolutely no difference in pregnancy per AI, whether we started at day 32 or whether we started at day 39. And this was done on 5 sites, Texas, Minnesota, Kansas, Florida, and Wisconsin. There was almost 2,000 cows in this study, about 500 cows per treatment. This was a 2x2 design. It was day 32 or day 39 and cedar, no cedar. But the take-home message is there's no difference whether you start at day 32 or day 39 with your Resync program. So within this study, we wanted to look at insemination rate according to win the synchronization program. So as I talked about, utilizing those GnRHs, we can really hurt heat detection. As farms become more and more aggressive and as technology continues to get better, we're finding ways to catch cows open quicker. So we've got blood tests out there. There's milk tests. I'm hearing of inline milk progesterone tests coming to the U.S. So I think there's a lot of technologies that we're going to be getting more and more aggressive at being able to catch cows open quicker. And with that, people are going to want to resynchronize animals faster to get them AI'd and bred quicker, which makes sense. But however, we don't want to do that at the expense of reducing fertility. So in this study, we set it up where they started this GnRH prior to OVSync either at day 17, days 24, or day 31, or day 38. And when you do that, if you give GnRH starting at day 17, as you'd expect, because a lot of animals are going to start coming into heat after day 17, you can see by this blue line here that we knock down heat detection and force cows all the way through the time day I program. Whereas if we waited till at least after this day 24 mark, a lot more animals were caught in heat. And granted, we did reduce some heat detection, but not near as bad as if we started out here at day 17. And then again, if you go out here even at day 31, again, we pick up a few more cows in heat. Eventually out here, they'll get time day I. But the reason I show this is people are going to go in early with starting their OVSync or starting the first GnRH of a GGPG program. Keep in mind, you're going to hurt heat detection if you're going before this day 24, day 25 time period. So go back to this original slide. This is the pattern of return to estrus of lactating dairy cows. You can see that a lot of animals show a heat in that days 20 to 24, about 50% of them, as I mentioned earlier. However, if I'm going in there with a Resync program, let's say I'm ultrasounding at day 28 or doing some type of blood test that early, then I go in a week prior and start with my GnRH injection at day 21 so that when the animals are called open at day 28, I can give prostaglandin and finish the time day I program. If you do this, you give your GnRH injection, you're going to hurt or knock down a lot of those heats, so those cows are going to show heat. You're not going to abolish them, but you are going to reduce heat detection, which probably isn't good. So if you can start your synchronization program and that GnRH doesn't occur until after that, about day 25, I got on here day 25-ish. The reason I say that is because we don't know the exact time, but I know it's in this 24, 25 time frame. And if we start the sync programs around there, we've at least got out after the time period when a lot of animals are going to show a heat. So the last take-home message is economic value of resynchronization depends on three main things. It's the balance between the interbreeding interval, the proportion of cows re-inseminated after estrus detection, and the number of cows receiving time day I and fertility of both time day I and estrus detection. So in other words, if you try to go in and really aggressively with a Resync program, but you end up forcing more cows in your shot list for a worse fertility or no difference in fertility, economically that's not going to be as beneficial as it might be to waiting a little longer but catching more cows, let's say, in heat for a better fertility, assuming your conception rates are good on heats. So this is where I'd asked Dr. Giordano to help me out with some economics, and he sent me some slides, some papers that he had published, so I appreciate Julio's help on that. And he had done this off of a tool that University of Wisconsin has. It's this is the website to it, but it's basically a tool, a repro monitor tool that you can go in and put in the sync program that you're using versus maybe one you're thinking about going to. You can put in there the data from your farm, what your heat detection is, what the fertility of those heats are, and then play with that program to look at is there value if you wanted to add something in or take something away, or if you want to extend the interval, and it'll really show you the economics across these programs. So it's a nice tool, and we used it, and Julio used it for this particular paper here that was published in 2012. And so he wanted to compare two reproductive programs, one that did 100% timed AI. So in this, he used an economic model here. So it makes some assumptions and does simulations across this program. But it's basically looking at pre-sync, off-sync programs, 100% timed AI, no heat detection, with a resynchronization program that started 1 week prior to preg check. Okay, he compared that to what if we're doing a combination of estrus detection and AI. So after a pre-sync program, they're utilizing cherry picking, their heat detection, AI off of that, and then after the first timed AI, they'd use heat detection throughout. So they wanted to compare the economic value of what it was if we're doing a 100% timed AI versus heat detection in with the timed AI program. And so I know this is a complicated slide here, but if you'll focus on this top red bar here, this is what we're comparing all these 19 different scenarios to. It's basically 100% timed AI, so they utilized a conception rate timed AI of 42% and a conception rate timed AI on the Resync program of 30%. And then they wanted to compare that to looking at varying levels of heat detection, so anywhere from 30% all the way up to 80%, with a conception rate, in this particular instance, I would say a low conception rate of 25% off of those heat-detected cows. And then, as you'd expect, the conception rate varying here as well across these programs. So then they jumped up. What changed here was a conception rate of 30% off your heat-detected cows, or a conception rate of 35% on your heat-detected cows. So varying levels of heat detection with increasing levels of conception rates to those heats, comparing it versus 100% timed AI. Dr. Giordano looked at this. Again, our baseline, this net value of 0 here, that's our 100% timed AI, and this is the net value of dollars per cow per year in this scenario. So if they have a 25% conception rate on their heat-detected cows, and this is heat detection from 30% up to 80%, compared to doing 100% timed AI, you would lose money, $8 to $17 per cow per year. So in other words, if you have low conception rates on your heat-detected animals, it's probably better off to do 100% timed AI, assuming you can get better fertility with 100% timed AI. If you have average conception rates on your heat-detected cows, you're breaking even or making a little bit of money from $1 to $10 per cow per year. And then if you have fairly good conception rates of 35% on your heat-detected cows, then you're making $9 to $32 per cow per year. And the better the heat detection, the more money you're going to make. So this just proves the point that if you can catch a cow in heat, we can get good fertility, but it's important that you get good fertility to those heats. Otherwise, it might be better to just do 100% timed AI. So I'm going to end this with showing just this is GnRH versus what I call prostaglandin-based first postpartum timed AI protocols. So I get asked a lot, what's the protocol I recommend? And I go back to there's not a one-size-fits-all. I do know that utilizing a pre-sync, off-sync program, that this allows for cherry picking and you to catch cows in heat because it uses multiple prostaglandin injections, and so it's going to promote heat detection. So if a goal on your farm is to catch cows in heat, this is a good program. If you look at double OVSync or G6G, both of those are great programs for full-timed AI, no heat detection. But if you're wanting to catch cows in heat, keep in mind these two programs, because of the multiple GnRH injections, is going to reduce your heat detection. On your resynchronization programs, again, double OVSync, good program for full-timed AI. Keep in mind it's going to reduce your heat detection. GGPG program, another one, a good program, but keep in mind it's going to reduce heat detection. Your prostaglandin, then wait 10 to 12 days, start OVSync. You can cherry pick off of this, catch cows in heat. This is a good program and promotes heat detection. And then again, your G6G, same thing. Because of the GnRH injections, you're going to reduce heat detection. So keep this in mind when you're looking at what protocol you want to use on your farm. If you want to catch cows in heat and you can get good fertility to those heats, make sure and pick a protocol that's going to promote heat detection. So take-home messages: pre-sync before off-sync improves fertility, whether that's first AI or resync. Whether you're using GnRH or HCG for your first injection as a pre-sync or your GnRH injection of off-sync, keep in mind you're going to reduce estrus detection and prostaglandins promote. Don't use a protocol that's going to reduce heat detection if you're trying to detect heat. Normally, we see in the west-southwest fertility of about 5 to 10 percentage units better on heat-detected cows versus time-day-eyed cows. Now, granted, the time-day-eyed cows are normally a more concentrated population of problem animals. That's the reason they didn't show a heat. But this can be different. I've been to farms, and again, it seems it's more prevalent up in the upper Midwest and Northeast, where it's the vice versa, where their fertility on those heat-detected cows are the same or worse than their time-day-eye program. So kind of look at that. If we can get better fertility on heat-detected cows and time-day-eyed, then we obviously want to take advantage of that. But if you can't get good fertility or accurately catch a cow in heat, maybe looking at a full time-day-eye program is better for your farm. Initiating sync programs too early, I'd say before day 25, keep in mind you're going to greatly reduce your heat detection and probably not improve fertility and maybe even hurt. Shortening your resync interval is good, but not at the expense of reducing fertility. And estrus detection is important, but must have accurate detection with good conception rates to those. So keep in mind, time-day-eye protocols, I think, are a great insurance tool. Having a robust sync program in place is important because you're not going to catch 100% of the cows in heat, no matter what you're using. Activity systems, tail paint, all of the above. You're not going to catch 100% of the cows, and time-day-eye will allow that. So with that, I appreciate the time, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? The first question that was posed, Dr. Bilby, is, well, first of all, thank you very much for the talk. And then the first question was, what were the days open in the study where you compared the prostaglandin with the 7-day interval, the prostaglandin 11-day interval, and the GnRH used as a pre-synchronization program? So were you able in that study to compare actual days open across those treatments?
We didn't look at days open as the definition of what days open is, but what we did is looked at interval between breeding. And so I can back up to that slide to show you the AI interval between breedings, which is going to be somewhat representative of days open. Let me get back to it here. So that's the interval between AIs. So you can see that it was shorter for the prostaglandin group, 36 days, versus the GnRH group was about 6 days longer. So I'm going to assume that over time that would extrapolate into, approximately about that much more days open as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question that was asked was the study with the prostaglandin 7 days and prostaglandin 11 days. In these farms, were the ovaries of the cows evaluated when prostaglandin was given?
Good question. Yes, we did evaluate whether these animals had a CL or not, and higher progesterone levels or not on some of these animals. And so, yes, we did evaluate that. And that brings up a good point as well. So I believe in your study, Ricardo, and feel free to jump in and comment on this, and in these studies, we definitely see that the GnRH group definitely does better on cows with no CL, as one would expect. So if I could go in there and stage the ovaries with an ultrasound, and I can say whether that cow has a CL or not. If she has a CL, I would say give the prostaglandins. And detect the cow in heat or give the prostaglandins and then detect cows in heat and let them fall into the OV sink 7 to 11 days later. If they don't have a CL, then I would just give that extra GnRH of the GGPG program and then wait a week and let them start OV sync. And I believe in your study, Ricardo, when you all separated out, definitely you had a much better fertility on those no CL cows, those that got the extra GnRH versus the prostaglandin. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We had the same findings that you did. Actually, in the herds that I do herd checks, when the cows are open and they don't have a CL, they go to the GnRH and then 1 week later start the time day I, so the GnRH pre-synchronization. If they do have a CL, then we go with the prostaglandin pre-synchronization. One question I have for you then is, if I am going to implement something like this in a herd, how can I monitor whether or not I'm inseminating enough cows after the prostaglandin to know that I'm not hurting myself by not re-inseminating fast enough and extending the interval between inseminations?
Okay, I think if I understand that question, are they saying, how do I know? Restate that question for me, if you would.
Well, if somebody implements the program based on prostaglandin, so the cow is open, gets a prostaglandin, we look for heats for 12 days or so, and then enter the time day I guess the question is, how can I make sure that I am, what would be a level of insemination in heat in this 12 days that would be okay to have so that we are not causing a problem with extending the interval to re-insemination? Yeah, so how many cows do I have to be re-inseminated in heat after the prostaglandin?
Yeah, and, you know, I think every speaker has a question they hope they don't get. That's probably mine. I don't know the exact, so I'm guessing they're saying what level of heat detection do you have to have good heat detection in order to justify giving these prostaglandin detecting heats. I think that's the way I'm interpreting the question. And I don't know an exact level of how many cows should be getting inseminated off of that prostaglandin in order to say, yep, that's good heat detection, you should be using the prostaglandins and heat detect versus GnRH. I don't know a cutoff. I mean, I've kind of used my gut and said, you know, somewhere above 50%, but, you know, then again, if you get better fertility off of heat-detected cows than what you can get in your time day I, to me, you know, no matter what heat detection level it is, that's going to be better than letting them go into your OV sync, get 3 extra injections for the same or worse fertility. Ricardo, you got anything to add? I know you've looked at that as well. But.
Yeah. We when we did our study, because we had similar fertility between the GnRH pre-syncing and the prostaglandin pre-syncing, when we did the calculation of how many cows we needed to re-inseminate in heat before going to the time day I for the prostaglandin group, we came out to be at least, very least, about 65% of the cows. So if we started inseminating fewer than 65% of the cows that got a prostaglandin in heat before they got to the time day I, we learned that we wouldn't have the advantage of interval to re-insemination, and then it would probably be better off just putting everybody through a GnRH pre-synchronization program.
Okay. That's good, because in this particular study as well, we were getting about 75% of the cows in heat off of the prostaglandin injections. So that's interesting. You know, another, that brings up a good point too. So in this prostaglandin 7-day program, I should have, if I didn't, put a big disclaimer in there that if you have bad heat detection and you're missing a lot of cows in heat, or if you're not doing heat detection, I would not do that program, because you're going to have a lot more cows fall into the OV sync at low progesterone levels and at not the right stage of the cycle, and you're going to have worse fertility. So I would only do a prostaglandin 7 days later hit OV sync if I had really good heat detection on my dairy, and assuming I'm missing very few cows that responded to that prostaglandin injection. Otherwise, I would stick to the 10, 11, or 12-day interval.
Okay. A couple more questions. First, would you consider the short OV-sync program, the 5-day program, with or without progesterone for resyncing open cows?
I haven't seen the data, but I believe Florida's got some data showing some benefits using a 5-day program. I can't recall off the top of my head the difference if they compared it 5-day versus 7-day, but they have seen some benefits using a 5-day program, and I believe they had to use 2 shots of prostaglandins in order to get good CL regression for that.
Okay. One more question. Would it be reasonable, or would you encourage or accept a herd to use this prostaglandin presynchronization program if the ovaries are not being ultrasounded, if the ovaries are not being examined?
Yes, I think even if you're not examining the ovaries, still utilizing some type of presync tool. And if you're doing heat detection, I would recommend a prostaglandin approach versus the GnRH approach.
Okay. I guess last question then. I think you already talked about this at length as far as how does the GnRH or prostaglandin presynchronization affect the heat detection 20 to 30 days after AI. Well, I guess the question is, will giving a presync GnRH or a presync prostaglandin affect in any way the distribution of estrus after the time of AI? So will any of the two have a different response to the re-insemination after the time of AI?
Re-insemination after the time of AI. So.
Yeah.
I think, if I understand it, if you're given GnRH prior to days 24, 25, I think that just goes back to you're really going to knock down heat detection. If you're using prostaglandins, I mean, one, you can't normally because we can't detect a cow open that early, but if you're using them, they're obviously going to respond to those that have a CL, and a CL that's at least 6-7 days old. So I again wouldn't promote GnRH prior to day 24, 25. Did that answer the question?
I believe the question is, so you do the presynchronization with GnRH or prostaglandin, and I believe the person understands that the GnRH will suppress heat if you go too early. But the question is, will the presyncing with GnRH or prostaglandin affect how the cows come back to heat after the time they eye? So will the presync protocol affect the return to estrus, not as much suppressing previous estrus?
Okay, no. If these cows got the presync, either prostaglandin or GnRH, and then they made it all the way to the OVSync program, and they went through the OVSync, their return to estrus is not going to be different whether they had or didn't have a presync program, in my opinion.
I believe we have time for a couple more questions quickly here. The first question is, I guess just to follow up on this presynchronization issues, the question is it reasonable to simply start an OVSync at open diagnosis with cows that have a good CL, a CL that is more than, let's say, 30 or 40 millimeters in diameter?
Yes, I mean, it's reasonable to start. If you want to start an OVSync at open preg check on cows with good CL, I see no problem with that. I think an advantage of what we discussed here is if you can do some type of pre-synchronization. It's not that you're technically hurting yourself by giving an OVSync at open diagnosis, a straight OVSync. We've done that for several years now, but the advantage of doing a pre-sync program is the improvement in fertility and getting them in the right stage of the cycle. So I also caution those who look at CL size and to make a judgment call. I think it's very hard to say, okay, this is a good CL, bad CL at 25 millimeters or 30 millimeters. I've seen very small CLs on an ovary produce a lot of progesterone, and which is the key. So, another thought.
Okay, and the last question is, have there been any studies done when cows are diagnosed open and giving prostaglandin when they're found open, and then breeding the cows 3 days later with a generate injection.
Yeah, so I'm trying to recall the study. It was done in Florida by Bartolome on a resync program. They called it Quick Sync, if I remember correctly. And it's done out of Thatcher's lab. So they did look at that in cows that had a CL giving prostaglandin. And trying to recall off the top of my head, I don't think the fertility was that great in that compared to doing something with prior GnRH. Ricardo, do you recall that study?
Yeah, I do. It's exactly right. Bartolome did this in, I think, 2002, and what they did was if the cow had a CL and had a follicle greater than 10 millimeters in diameter, then they did the quick sync. We did a similar thing, but using ECP back in the day, that ECP was available. And I agree with you, the fertility is not great. We even though we're attempting to predict that the cow is in diestrus because she has a large CL and a large follicle, it doesn't seem that we are that accurate. And then also what happens there is that you start creating too many different protocols on the same farm, and when you have 2, 3, 4 different protocols for different cows, I'm always concerned about compliance. I think we end up losing a little bit on compliance.
Yeah, and I had a farm, as you were explaining that, I had a farm that was doing something similar to that, and kind of force breeding after prostaglandin a couple, 3 days later. And the conception rates, we monitored those. The conception rates were pretty low on those animals, and when they stopped doing that, fertility really came up on that herd. So again, I would probably steer clear of the quick sync protocol.
Okay, last question, and this is really the last question. So as pre-sync should increase follicle size, we should have less embryo losses because we have larger CLs and more progesterone. Is that an accurate statement?
When we looked at pregnancy loss in several of these studies compared to not doing a pre-sync program, at least in the studies that I've been involved with, and I believe Ricardo's years as well, showed no difference in pregnancy losses between the groups.
Yes, I agree with that. Unfortunately, we're not. Actually, when you pre-sync the cow, you may have smaller follicles at the end of the protocol because the cows tend to respond better to the first GnRH of the time they eye. So when you're pre-syncing the cows and they're responding properly to the injections you're giving, you tend to have actually smaller follicles ovulating at the end, particularly if you're going to a 5-day protocol and so on.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Bilby, for the excellent presentation. Thank you all for the excellent questions. I believe it was really useful, very good discussion about this topic. And again, this will be posted on the DCRC website, and we look forward to seeing you in November 7th and 8th in Indianapolis. Thank you very much, all.